welcome once again to our show, and this is Issue Forum. And that was a song, Without Wings. And it was sung by our guest here, Pat Girondi. And to my left, I have Anisa Peraica, my co-host, a local area Chicago personality, and works for Fox News. And Pat Girondi to my right, who is usually in Bari, so he's Bares, Italy.
Bares.
And it's interesting because we're filming a little bit before Christmas, and Bari is where the relics of St. Nicholas of Myra, actually he was in Turkey, and somehow the relics got to Italy, and that is a great shrine there to St. Nicholas of Myra in Bari. And I think they just opened it to the Orthodox because the Russian and the Greek Orthodox have a big devotion to St. Nicholas. And it's also apropos because St. Nicholas is the patron of children. He is the saint for children, and he died a martyr helping out children. So this is a show about trying to help children. But Pat, before I start on what exactly the show is about, I want to hear a little bit about you. Just a couple things that come to mind is that you are on Oprah Winfrey, that you have a child with a very rare genetic disease, and that you're a self-made man. But I don't want to reveal too much. I want you to tell your story.
All right, my name is Pat Girondi. I'm from the Bridgeport area originally. I lived all over the south side before I was 15. I lived in 15 houses before I finally settled in Bridgeport. I went to a seminary for about a year and a half because a priest tried to do a favor for my mother and get me off the streets. That didn't work out. They threw me out after about a year and a half, and then I went to De La Salle for about a year and a half. But I got in trouble, and a nice judge on 61st and Racine gave me an ultimatum, either to go in the military or go into jail. I was 16. The only service at the time that had that I could have entered that had delayed enlistment was the Air Force. I ended up spending a year and a half in the Air Force. I got out. I worked at Great Lakes docks and loading trucks, and then I started driving a truck. One thing led to another, and I ended up being a runner at the Chicago Board Options Exchange.
Okay. Well, before we go into that, I want to hear about your activities at the Board of Options Exchange. But it sounded like you had a little bit of a troubled youth. You were probably a little wild, got in some trouble, were in court in the court system, and your mother was a little stressed out about you. So it's a good message to people, though, and our viewing audience. We always like to have a positive message that there's always time for redemption. One of my favorite movies and a play, I saw the play a couple years ago, is Les Miserables, and it's a great movie with Liam Neeson, and it's a story that there's always time for redemption, and that you can make some of yourself. So those people who are watching our shows, maybe you didn't graduate high school, maybe you got in some trouble with the law, maybe you were hanging around with the wrong type of people, maybe you even have a conviction. And there's always hope. And so tell us how you started to find your success at the Board of Options.
Well, geez, I really don't even know. I started there as a runner, and my first
How
boss...
old were you around that time?
I was 19, and my first boss was Larry Hansen. If he's watching, hi, Larry, great guy. And I got hired away by a guy from Singapore named Walton Lee. He was my second boss, and God, if I get into the story, it's like real long. It's really kind of funny too. But 2 socks. I socked 2 guys, and ended up a traitor. But that's the truth. So the first guy, Chris Phillips, was my first boss. He put the paychecks out on the desk on Friday, and then we would go there. He'd sign them, and we'd leave. And he went to Hawaii without signing the checks. So I took my check. I signed it myself, and on Monday morning when my direct supervisor, Mark, asked me where the check was, I told him that it was probably in the bank because I would go on the currency exchange and cashed it. He couldn't believe. He said, well, it's impossible. It's not signed. I said, yeah, mine, it's signed. He said, who signed it? I said, I signed it. He slapped me, so I gave him a sock. So when I went to get my last check, this guy from Singapore, Walton Lee, he was there, and he was kind of wondering why I was there in the middle of the day on a Wednesday. And I said, I just come to get my couple of days check. And he didn't speak good English, but he said, you're without a job. We're without a job. I said, yeah, I am. And he said, why did you get fired? I said, I socked somebody. And he said, well, would you like to work for me? And he hired me because in the pits, when he would go in the pits, he didn't speak good English. And he was a very short guy. And so whenever you go in the pit to buy something or sell something, instead of buying it or selling it to him, they would make fun of him. They, slant their eyes and all these fun things. And so he hired me, and I started walking in the pits with him, and the guys heard that I socked somebody, so they stopped messing with him. So I worked for him for about a year, and I had another problem. Some guy named Kenny. I ended up socking him and get fined 10 grand. And
That was a pit fine by like the board,
governors,
the governors,
right? Yeah. And so I didn't have the 10 grand, and I went to Walton, my boss. I said, "Look, at Doc, you got to give me the money. You got to let me take the money out of the account." He said, "No way, you're not taking it out because I didn't tell you to sock nobody." And so I was getting thrown off the board because I didn't have money to pay the fine. So when I walked around and said, "Hello, thank you to the people that I knew when I was there," and I said, "I'm going back to low trucks," a guy named Billy Powers took me up to two guys, Larry Bloom and Corky Eisen, two nice Jewish guys, and went upstairs. They said, "We heard you're a nice kid. Do you want to trade?" I said, "Yeah, I'd love to trade, but." They said,
So
"Okay,
people
you
were
start."
approaching you and just coming up to you, even after these misfortunes, people were still coming up to you and offering you this?
Well, back in the
Must have
80s,
good luck.
the CBOE was like a place where you ate pizza on the floor and jeans. It wasn't real organized. There was a Young Exchange, founded in '73, and like.
I think it just merged back with the CBOT, if I'm not
Not
mistaken.
yet, not yet. I mean, there's rumors of it, but I'm a member. I was a member, and still a member of CBOT as well, in New York Stock Exchange. But yeah, God has always been good to me. Or I always say, because I have so many patients that are not Catholic now that are interested in our cure, and I always sign a lot of my letters or even my emails to people in Pakistan or wherever it is, or India, wherever it is that they are. That may the force be with you. I kind of robbed it off like Star Wars, and I put a capital F. But who's ever around there, of course, I've been very lucky.
Well, the lesson is not that you should punch out people, but that people have helped you after you were in difficult situations.
Right. I mean, without a doubt. And I was on Italian television about in November actually, and I know the girl got nervous because I told the story, and she goes, "Well, wait a minute, we shouldn't be telling our people if you punch people." I said, No. Every now and then we should be telling our people, because every now and then you need the socks on. I mean, there are people that really. I mean. It's kind of funny that we live in a country where the government can electrocute people, but if somebody offends you, they spit at you or beats up your kid or whatever it is, that you can't give them a good old-fashioned sock. I think kind of we should go back a little bit, but I'm certainly not a violent
certainly in
person.
Italy, Berlusconi gives you enough on Italian TV to be interesting. So
Well,
you're in good company.
Yeah. No, but, okay, I'm not a big TV guy or a big Berlusconi guy. I actually am. Well, I mean, that might be for another show. I don't want to get you guys off. It's only a half hour. But Berlusconi is trying to do back the laws, the anti-mafia laws, which they ought to redo in the United States as well, because, I mean, it really gets a little bit oppressive. But he's an interesting person, Berlusconi. I met him a couple times, by the way. So.
Okay, so how did you start getting your success on the so you were working for these two other gentlemen, Mr. Bloom and Mr. Eisen?
Well, I actually started trading myself. So I went on Monday morning.
Now, did you have your own seat?
No, I mean, you leased them back then.
Okay.
So I was on a leased seat, and I went in on Monday morning. I worked after 2 weeks. Larry called me up to his office. He says, "Oh, geez, Pat, I'm sorry." He called me in his office. I didn't put any money in your account. I says, "Yeah, that's all right. I had like $1,800 by then, because I knew I had to go in every day. Couldn't go debit. I had to make $300 or $200, and that was it. At the height of the career, we had about 18 traders, most of them from Bridgeport, that worked for me. And all of them, or most of them, have done very well. Most of them bought memberships. Thank God, all good guys, all honest guys, and it was a wonderful experience.
Okay.
So where was the fortune was made, pretty much?
You know what? It kind of took off. I remember I had a 1973 Cutlass in about 3 different colors, and Chucky Bills, one of my good buddies. I came off the floor and I'd made $5 grand. The first day I ever made $5 grand. And I remember I didn't know what to do. I mean, because I never had like $5. And so I went outside. He was waiting in the car, and I started jumping on the hood of the car, like just jumping. And he said, "Well, I know you're nuts, but come on, Anyway, so that was the first time that I had made $5 grand. And after that, it just started. I had a knack at it. And thank God I was good at it, and I ended up making some money.
Okay. Now, so sort of after this time, you were voted, I understand, the most eligible bachelor. You were in a number of TV, Playgirl magazine,
Yeah.
most eligible bachelor, and you were telling me that one of the local TV stations did a story on you, and they showed you coming out in your Rolls Royce.
Right.
I'm sure a Rolls Royce at that time,
Especially
70s,
in
80s,
Bridgeport.
in Bridgeport, it wasn't the common car.
Right.
Bridgeport, it's a good middle class neighborhood. There's some wealthy people, but you don't see Rolls Royces that often.
I mean, the Rolls Royce I actually bought almost on a dare. I had broken up. I had wanted to marry an Italian girl, and the girl I had at the time was not Italian, so I decided I had to dump her. And she was calling my house constantly, and she's the only one that had this number up in my room. And I was kind of really depressed because she was a nice girl. She was actually a local celebrity. Her name was Shauna McGarvey. She was a
Was it
ballerina.
just pressure from your family to break up with her, or was it just
No. I wanted to marry an Italian girl. So
if you knew that in the
it was time.
beginning, were you just dating a date, or was it long-term commitment, or you just knew that it was going to happen and you guys were just going to break it off?
We live in the 21st century. I was reading this morning that people don't even date anymore. They hook up and then they start dating. So, I'm not sure how it happened, but she was a real nice girl, and I felt bad about it. So I was a little bit down and out about it, and I was with a friend of mine, Johnny Farrell, and we went by Lober's downtown on Rush Street. And so we're walking by there, and this big black guy says, hey, man, you want to try a car? Now, I'm in shorts, He says, want to try a car, but he was such a nice guy. I says, all right, I'll try a car. So we get in this white silver Shadow. I driving, Johnny Farrow in the back, and this black salesman on the passenger side. So now we're going out, and his manager stops, and he's looking inside it. Hold on, he says, and he's looking in the car, and he puts his arm on the car. Now I'm driving, and I'm like, who's this wise guy, But he's a manager. And he looks at the salesman, he says, what are you showing this guy, letting this guy drive this car? This guy ain't buying nothing. He couldn't buy anything. I said, get your freaking hand off the car. And I took out of the lot. I called up Stevie, who worked for me. I said, bring me a check. And I bought the car. I never drove it. There was baptisms, weddings, whatever it was. Everybody in the neighborhood drove it. I drove it 5 times maybe. I couldn't stand it. But, I had it.
And you auctioned it off for charity, I understand.
Yes, we auctioned it off in 98 or 99. I don't remember the year anymore, but we auctioned it off for charity.
Okay. Now, I know you have 3 kids, so let's kind of fast forward. You were a successful single guy, most eligible bachelor, Playgirl magazine, local TV, but then maybe some consider a tragedy, you might consider an opportunity. You have a child with a rare genetic disease.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that. And I'm sure that changed your life probably irrevocably, and that's why we're here today, to talk about a business that you started to help your child and other children, not just your child, with this rare disease. And tell us a little bit about the child's birth, when you found out what the disease is.
Okay. In 1992, I had 2 boys already, Rocco and Francesco. And,
Good Irish names.
Good Irish names, which is another story. I was Irish for about 27 years. But I was in Germany at the time because I had a company in Germany and Switzerland. And my wife told me that I had to go into a hospital and have blood taken and sent to Italy. And there was something wrong with Rocco. He was lethargic and he was very pale. He was 2.5 years old. Eventually, I ended up back home, of course, and he was diagnosed with thalassemia major, which in the United States is called Cooley's anemia or the Mediterranean anemia.
And what is that? Tell us what that is. What is Cooley's anemia?
Cooley's anemia is a cousin disease of sickle cell anemia. Mediterraneans and Eastern people, so Asians, Chinese, Pakistans, etc., get thalassemia. The doctor who discovered it in the early 1900s, his name was Cooley, so they call it Cooley's anemia, and they call it Mediterranean anemia because they noticed it in Greek and Italian immigrants in the United States. But in fact, the largest amount of it's in Pakistan and India and China. And it is actually a hemoglobinopathy, which means that the patient can't make his own hemoglobin, which is the oxygen carrier in the blood. So an average patient is transfusing whole blood every 20 days, hooked up to a pump up to years ago. Now there's pills for it, but my son Rocco was hooked up to a pump until he was 12 or 13 years old, 12 hours a day, to get the iron out of the blood that's coming from the transfusions. The average age of mortality is 27. However, in countries like the United States, Italy, Western civilizations, they can live into their 30s. So when he was diagnosed, however, they told me he'd live to be 10 years old. And
And that must have been very hard on you. I mean, you have a child. How did you and your wife take it to be told that your child is going to live to be 10 years old?
Yeah. Rocco was named after my grandfather, and I didn't have a father growing up, and my grandfather helped raise me, and he was very important to me, and eventually it's because of him I probably ended up in Italy, because this romanticism of finding out where we're from, and my insistence on marrying an Italian woman. So when Rocco was diagnosed, it pretty much shattered my life like it would shatter any parent's life. And I handle it completely different. You know, we say in Italy, and I'm sure they say the same thing in the United States, that when you have a sick child, you know, a couple handles it completely different. And certainly in my case, it's that way. My wife, you know, of course, was destroyed. And within 6 months, I would say that her attitude was that she basically couldn't emotionally take it anymore. And it was like, look, he has this disease. Take him to the hospital. Do what we have to do. We have another son to raise. And subsequently after, another one. Because my oldest is 18, this next one's 17, the next one's 15. And let's get on with our life. You can't ruin the lives of 2 other sons trying to take care of the first one. Now, my attitude was very different. And, you know, I was like, look, there's no cure. It's the only thing that cures thalassemia is a bone marrow transplant. People don't realize that there's really only matches for about 30% of the world. So if either of you get leukemia or, God forbid, a disease, you need a bone marrow transplant. There's only a 3 in 10 chance to get a bone marrow transplant. There's really no matches. Okay, 30% of the world has matches. Rocco doesn't have a match, so there was no cure for him. And
the parents don't necessarily match on the bone marrow.
Never. I mean, hardly ever. Hardly ever. There's only a 30% chance for anyone in the world to have your match HLA compatibility for a bone marrow transplant. Most people don't understand that because the media or whatever it is, they talk about bone marrow transplants like it's a walk in the park. The fact of the matter is that 70% of people have no one that could ever give them a bone marrow transplant. So Rocco is one of those in the 70%. And my attitude was, you know, hey, you know, if this is what it is, then I guess I got to cure disease. And it was a bit arrogant on my part, there's no doubt about it. And certainly me and the missus had a lot of discussions about, you know,
not arguments,
this
discussions.
idea. Yeah. I'm living what should be another Italian show, which right now I'm actually legally separated for 5 years. We have a house of about 9,000 square feet divided in the middle. It's a real fun thing. It really ought to be a show. I love Italian style. But, yeah, I mean, it eventually got crazy because one parent, rightly so, you know, what do? You got a sick kid, you take him to the doctor. You don't know, the doctors are the specialists. It's like if your car is broken, you take it to a mechanic and you get on with your life. And instead I couldn't get on with my life. And
so what did you do? What was your next step once you coast?
In 1993, he was diagnosed in October. By 1993, I had already founded Emerging Pharmaceutical Technologies. We were working around a wonderful professor who's now she's at Boston University. I think she's the head of hematology. Her name is Susan Perrine, and she had a drug that stimulated the fetal hemoglobin in these patients. And my son actually avoided transfusions for a year and a half longer than he would have had we not done this experimental medicine. But we did the experimental medicine in California because at the time Susan Perrine was in San Francisco at San Francisco General and in Corey.
How did you get hooked up with her?
An Italian doctor named Rino Vullo is a wonderful guy. He told me that she was working on this in California. We lived in the hospital because, according to American law, if you're doing an experimental drug, IV, you need to be in the hospital to do it. And it was 75 days I apologize, 40 days cost 75 grand, experimental medicine, and the insurance doesn't cover it. It wasn't even that the biggest problem, but, you know, he was living hooked up to a pump in the hospital with all of these kids that were all around him. And to be quite honest, it was kind of crazy. A lot of these kids, and we don't realize that, but a lot of these kids that are in these horrible situations, whether they have AIDS or leukemia, I mean, some of these kids, the parents went once a week to visit them. I mean, we got yelled at, I remember one time, by the nurses for picking up the other kids because they said we were going to spoil them. And it was kind of interesting. I mean, if you know, I've lived 19 years in Europe, so I know a little bit about the European healthcare, and I know a lot about the American healthcare and the European healthcare. And you know, no one should have discussions about what we should do about medicine in the United States unless they've really been in the system. So I was in the system, and so we basically decided to live in Italy so my son could go do the experimental medicine at home and live like a normal life. So we learned how to do everything. My son had a catheter in his chest that we had to clean every 7 days, a needle like this long going into his skin. He was 3.5, 4 years old. It was really an experiment. I had a real experience, and it went well. I opened up a clinic in our hometown, Altamura. I flew doctors in from the United States back and forth. I trained doctors in Italy. In 1995, I met John Walton.
Now, let's give some context. This is the son of Sam Walton.
Yes.
And that is the famous Walton family of Walmart fame.
Yes.
And I think at that time, Sam Walton, I think, was bigger than Bill Gates. I think he was the richest man in the world.
Yeah, and the family is. I mean, they worked 90. I mean, you know, the Waltons. What do? They bought, you know, junk from China before anybody else did. I mean, they're real. You know, I mean, it's not like, yeah, they're great people. Though, by the way, I mean, I've met actually all of them at John's memorial. John died in 2005. A wonderful guy. I mean, just a wonderful guy. But his story is incredible. John and his wife Christy had one son. Lucas, who's now 21 at University of Colorado College. Great kid, wonderful kid, and he was diagnosed with Wilms tumor when he was a year old. They gave him chemotherapy at the University of San Diego.
What is that disease?
Wilms tumor.
And what does that do?
It's a cancer.
Okay.
And it came back when he was 3 years old, and they wanted to cut out a lung. John and his wife said, "Look, you know, I mean, what do we do if we wait a month and don't let you cut out a lung?" And the doctor basically said, "Well, if we cut out the lung, the chance he's going to live a normal life anyway isn't really good." So they went down to the Hoxsey Institute in Mexico and ate grass. You know, I mean, they went on an herbal diet, all that, changed their, you know, I mean, I laugh a lot of times, you know, about, you know, we talk about why Americans are so unhealthy, and they really are, and, you know, then you remember that you have steroids in all your meats and stuff. We have steroids in all our meats and chemicals in every single thing you buy in the grocery store.
There's a lot more organic foods in Europe, I've noticed.
Yeah, but by the way, I mean, it's getting bad because the, you know, big Kraft and all the big conglomerates are getting in Europe. I mean, I laugh when people are counting calories. I mean, you know, don't count the calories, just cut your portion in half, but you don't want to eat all this diet stuff. I know people offer me gum, and I'll say, "Is there sugar in it?" And they say, No, there's no sugar. And I say, "Well, I'll take the sugar and get the cavity. You keep the cancer." I mean, you know, all of these chemicals that we just throw into these, there's 3,200 chemicals that a food company can just throw into your food kind of however they like. And, you know, they test this stuff on rats.
Well, speaking of that, do you know what the cause was, or is this a genetic disease? You know, some people believe mercury causes autism, but there's an increase in autism.
Thalassemia is actually, I'm sorry to get off track, but thalassemia is actually a genetic disease. And they believe that it's actually, when they had the Great Malaria Plague, it actually is a defense. So they claim that someone with the gene, like I have and like my wife has, we're carriers, we can't get malaria. Supposedly different types of malaria. The problem is that, you know, from each parent has 2 sets of chromosomes, and they pass one of the 2 onto their child. When there's a defect on both of them that are passed to the child, so it's a 1 out of 4 chance, and this is for any genetic disease, then the child has that disease.
Well, let me speed up a little bit because we only have a half-hour show here, and we're running close on time. We do have some time here. I want to speed up how you found the Errant gene management team. Your son, I understand, is well beyond 10.
He's 18.
He's 18 years old, as I understand. Although now they're saying that he might only live to 28.
Well, the average life expectancy is 27, but I mean, a kid like him, he could live well into his 30s.
Okay.
without being touched, you know. But
And so you're very hopeful about your son, and you've done heroic things. So tell us about the Errant Gene Management Team. And what I want to do before you leave the show here is maybe there's somebody out there in a viewing audience, either on the internet or on channels 19 and 21 in Chicago, or wherever they're watching the show, that they may have a child like this, or maybe they somehow can get involved with your company, and to give more publicity both to healing children as well as the business side of your company.
Right. Well, John Walton got involved because of his son. So
His son had the same...
No, his son had Wilms tumor, but the drug that we were using on Rocco also had an application for Wilms tumor. It's kind of a funny coincidence, but it's true. So John came in with $7.5 million. I put up the technology, and we formed a company called Beacon Pharmaceutical. During the whole time, there was, I don't know, probably $35 million put into Beacon Pharmaceutical the 9 years that I was with John. We were developing histone deacetylase inhibitors for cancer and non-cancer applications. I was, of course, on the board. I wasn't the director. I was living in Italy for the most part. And in 2000, I met Michelle Sedlin, who is a researcher at Sloan Kettering. In 2003, Michelle Sedlin announced that Sloan Kettering wouldn't fund the project any longer because it was ready to go into clinical trials. So I'll be at St. Jude Friday and Saturday this week for meetings with them. But most institutions or universities will never sponsor their own clinical trials. In the United States, it costs an average of $800 million to get a drug to the market in 18 years average.
You know, we only have about a minute to go. What I want to do is if anybody can get in contact with you, and any last words in this last minute that you think we should know, and your contact information.
Sure.
And website.
Errant Gene Therapeutics is the name of the company, but if you go into Google, just Google Pat Girondi.
That's your name on there.
And you can find me. I mean, the site that I use the most to disseminate actually information is my MySpace site. So it's MySpace/Pat Girondi. And that way I don't have any conflicts with being the CEO of the pharmaceutical
And
company.
quickly, how many people did you say that this disease affects?
1 million.
1 million?
So
in the
if you have a
U.S. or worldwide?
There's 1,200 in North America, or 1,800 in all of North America, and 1 million worldwide.
Okay.
So if you have a MySpace out there, add Pat Girondi as a friend. And if you know any children who have these very rare diseases, try to get them in contact with this program or another program.
Yeah, Pat, thank you for coming on, sharing your information about the disease and your background. And Frank, thanks for having me on today. Everyone out there, take care. Good night. God bless.